My privilege to go ahead and introduce Gabe Arnett from Moody's Analytics. Gabe.
Thank you. I am on. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this first slide. You guys can read this to your heart's content offline. Again, this is sort of a quick outline that I'm going to run through and hopefully sort of keep to it to a degree. And you thank my marketing and corp comm people for coming up with my beautiful template. So into a little bit of who I am. I'm a senior director. I've been at Moody's Analytics for about 10 plus years now. As you can see from my cartoon, I prefer to relate to myself as a dinosaur. I'm sort of an evangelist strategist. I've worn every hat known to the full stack, been in the hardware side even over the years. And predominantly my driving force is innovation and trying to solve really complicated problems with relative ease and simplicity. And obviously as a senior leader, I'm also concerned with our revenue and profit margins. So if I can save us a lot of money, that's really the big bang for the buck there. And I'm really measured by it. So that's a little bit about me. Not that impressed with myself, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. Moody's Analytics. So, who is Moody's Analytics? You guys have probably heard of Moody's. Moody's itself is the big credit rating agency. We rate sovereigns, we rate debts, we rate instruments, tranches, maturities, anything that has a credit rating behind it that people are going to invest in, we do that. Now, analytics is really a consortium of companies that Moody's has acquired over roughly a decade or so. I come from one of the companies that was acquired. We were originally headquartered here in San Francisco. It was called KMV. Stands for the three gentlemen that came up with a fabulous debt prediction model back in the day. And really that was a primary software arm that we were developing risk solutions and putting that model into it and crunching data and crunching customers' data and making it a little bit easier for them to do that job rather than build quant shops of their own. We still do that. We've added and grown that sort of portfolio. It includes training, professional services. We are actively working from an installable software phase now on most of the software side of the business and going to a true platform as a service and a service offering. To that degree, we're big enough. We also bought a company that was going to help us do that rather than try and figure that out ourselves. One of the plus sides of working for a company that has $3.3 billion in revenue. Most of that revenue comes from the ratings business. I'm happy to say that my product line comes from the primary push of getting that rating and that data and that information out to the marketplace. So we are regulated, but Moody's Analytics and my specific arm is responsible for getting the ratings information out through Moody's.com, which is our flagship website and ratings data platform, as well as through services and our data distribution channels, which are pretty classic, historic, FTP. Sort of branched into the web services front now to try and get that. Believe it or not, most of our clientele are also in the Stone Age and would rather consume flat files still. So that being said, you want to hear more about who we are and whatnot, you can go check that out and look us up. We are hiring, if anybody's looking. Let's see, there we go. So let's get into some of the meat. So why, NoSQL? What's the big deal there? It's been around for a while as a concept. In fact, I've been looking at this for roughly around 4-ish years. And then, even the fun little joke I like is a couple of Couchbase guys that I work with have been at other companies that we looked at over the course of the year. So it's sort of a slow saturation. But the gist of the things are that you get from traditional RBMS and, big financial shop. We have plenty of Sybase, plenty of Oracle, plenty of SQL. We have plenty of engineers that like to build relational databases and think relationally and do all those things. But, through time we've learned that, I want this thing to be really fast. I want it to be really good. I don't want to take offline upgrades. I mean, we still do this at least once a month now. We're now facing the dreaded Win 2000K upgrade change because we aren't going to have any support anymore. And like a big enterprise, we have tons of Windows 2003 servers. It's like a recurring nightmare for me. I had NT migrations, Windows migrations, and now here we are again. Which also plays into, we get a unique opportunity to reassess, and you take a project on that big, like, well, what it is now the time to introduce new technologies and move away from the SQL servers where we don't need SQL servers, Sybases, and what have you. One of the biggest things for us is a competitive advantage. I mean, the difference between us and S&P and Fitch, which is really our three main competitors, they do a fairly okay job on the internet. They do a better job on some of the other layers. They've beaten us in tablet and other adoption rates, but the idea is that we all suffer sort of the same problem of once a month we've got to do something, or every now and then we're taking a large action on somebody that's causing our data flows to choke, and therefore we're throwing up banners on our pages, and we're just not being the things that are possible today with other facets. And everyday life, people are experiencing fast and speed everywhere, Amazon and Google, and so they automatically adapt this mentality of, well, everything I do, whether it's for work or for anything, must be equally as fast. And when they go and experience things that aren't, they get a bad taste in their mouth, and that doesn't work for us. So really, another big factor for us is really that flexibility. I mean, today, every one of you, I'm sure, has faced this. The business comes and decides, well, we want to add some more data points and make those available. And then you got to go look at your tables that have million-plus rows in your relational stores. And you can add a column all day long as there's no constraint and it can be null, and then later you go and update that, or God forbid it's something different, or you even extend it. It's a long time to change that. It takes a long process, generally speaking, on average about a quarter of development time plus testing and QA and acceptance and all that fun stuff. We like to think we're agile shop, but that's not very agile, right? That faster, and with the technology choices that are out there today, I mean, the sky's the limit. So that's really why. Now, when you make that decision and then you start looking at this, and there are roughly 150 options out there. I think there's even more, and if you start wrapping your head around, well, the definition of SQL, there's all kinds of things that have existed for a long time that actually fit into this category, that aren't categorized that way because those companies don't market themselves. And there's also variations of what NoSQL means. We've spent a lot of time going through each of these trying to figure out, well, let's take our use case or our data and our problems and try and fit it into that, do some prototyping, POCing, do some investigations on the products and the companies themselves. Moody's Analytics and Moody's in general, we're a big enterprise. We aren't just going to go willy-nilly pick the first trick pony that's out there. We also want to make sure that the company, the provider we're going after has a healthy record. We don't want to invest in you to see you, suddenly a year later you were bought or you've been dissolved or what have you. You'll notice Foundation DB is on there. I did look at them as second Apple gobbled them up. That was a non-starter for us. So I've been in prototyping and playing around with Couchbase for probably about 2-3 years now. Roughly speaking, some of these components we have in production. We have Redis, obviously, for our caching, and we've been playing with the Couchbase alternative of that. We have MongoDB sitting in there for a metadata store for our rich content, which is more the PDFs and the actual research content themselves, and that's really a metadata repository. Mainly to drive an alternative approach to how we're storing and maintaining our CMS and making it more flexible. Traditionally, we were getting from our upstream providers flat PDFs and Word docs, which are great if you're going to redistribute them whole, but if you want to start breaking apart that content and distributing it and showing it in other varieties and options, take this from document A, take this from B, this bit over here from C, and maybe throw in a data table or something to be a little bit more active. It's sort of the bridge to do that. One of the dev teams that went off and was tasked with go figure this out. You're free and open to try this on your own. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to put Couchbase down your neck or anything else, even though I did try. They chose Mongo for a bit of reasons that I won't go into detail there. They are now being actively asked, now you've got to look at other options, because the original take on Mongo was X nodes and it would cost us Y, and that didn't pan out necessarily to be the case, and so it's gotten more expensive, and the prototype and POC we've done with Couchbase has proved to be, we can cut that cost and make the efficiency a lot better. The beauty is all of these guys keep driving and pushing the envelope, which drives innovation and the competition. And you know, the net effect of clients out here that I love is that the more innovative these products become, the more valuable that we can all, you know, get stuff out of it. And, you know, they push this. I mean, Couchbase 4 with Nickel, I mean, that's a phenomenal advancement in that state, which sets the bar higher for everybody else to now go and try and do that. Good, bad, and different. So I think the only other thing I want to talk about really here is, you know, graph databases as a concept. They're a very unique case. They're very sexy and fun and, you know, great to play with. They're great visualization of thinking of, well, how can I do this? And you know, we have data scientists that are really thrilled with that, and it's really good for their traversal and understanding and research, and we're using it that capacity. I don't know that this is necessarily a thing for us that we would have, you know, data here and in there kind of thing. So it's more, we're looking at it more for a backstore for recommendation engines and whatnot. And the only other point I'd like to make here is we played around with Postgres. And a couple of guys in the room were involved with me when I was telling them how we were doing this. They came out with JSON as a type and then JSON-B. The problem is you can do it, and it's great, and it's very, very fast. But if you know anything about Postgres, you want to go to production with Postgres, it's kind of not that fun to build a really good Postgres production environment unless you're into that kind of, well, let's figure this out because there's nothing out there to tell me how to do this, so I got to figure it out on my own. So we did that a little bit, and we got it, and then it was, at the end of the day, like, well, I can do this, and it's open source, and it's great, but now I got to go train a bunch of people to support this thing, and it wasn't going to work. So that's a little bit about that bit. Our selection criteria, I think I went through it. A lot of it was, you know, everything is around performance these days. Everything around is easy. I think some of the biggest things to us are really, what's that, you know, support model look like out there? How can I get the information? Can I pay somebody that I can call in the middle of the night when this thing doesn't start to work and who will remind me that it doesn't work because of something we did? Sometimes it'll be something you guys did. You know, simple, automation, seamless, all those things on the fly, just get it up and running with an easy button kind of thing. Those are the real primary drivers for us, and I think most other people. Hadoop integration, you know, I hate really throwing this out there because Hadoop is that big word that everybody uses, and, you know, it gets misinterpreted and, quite frankly, quite abused. For us, Hadoop really is still a growing stage. And I think if you look at the statistics, Hadoop as a whole, its penetration in the big enterprise space is around 4%, are roughly thinking about prototyping. It's a bit of a nuance. It's a bit unclear. And even to that degree, you start looking backwards internally at, well, what is my problem? Is Hadoop really going to solve my problem? And 9 times out of 10, it could solve my problem here and there, but I don't really want to take on the project to figure that all out. So we're spending more and more time on that, trying to see where is this best fit. And it's predominantly inside of our fortress, or I guess the latest word is data lakes, hubs, whatever those things are called, but I used to call them warehouses. So we're looking at more in that stage, the big store and the big processing engine of getting all of my information from all of my places, loading it raw, sort of doing the change there where we used to do ETL up front, and then we just threw away this other stuff. And now apparently we really shouldn't be throwing that away. We really care about it. We've been burned by that, by the way, so don't ever throw away your data. If you're paying somebody to give you data, never, ever throw it away. Because if you need it later, they won't give it to you. Or they'll give it to you for a lot of money. So those are sort of the big gists, and so you go through that, and quite frankly, Couchbase gives me all of these. And again, you know, not to belittle this, I've spent a lot of time playing with Couchbase. I've prototyped at least 3 different versions now, actually 4 if I count 4. Still actively prototyping 4 and helping out on that front, and every single time I do a change and we upgrade, it gets better and better, and I can check off more things. And you know, I'd speak from the hilltops about it. You know, and at work, a lot of guys are like, "Well, we have Mongo, we have Redis, we have this," and I don't know. We want another one. I'm like, yes, and I'm going to get rid of those other ones, so it's no big deal, right? We'll have one, since everybody likes to be one for some reason. I like diversity, and more the merrier. You attract more talent when you've got more tools and more interesting things to mess with, so why not? Like I said, the CPU RAM combination with fast storage, as long as you do that right yourself, you're going to get great scale. A lot of the capabilities of thinking about it in the way that it's all in memory, and you think of the previous architectures that we've had, like, well, I got all my data in SQL Server, but I got 10,000 concurrent sessions trying to hit it. I get locking, and wait, shouldn't we look at the common sets of data that are being served up that clients are after? And that doesn't really change. So why don't we cache it? And so we get Redis into the cache layer, and then you learn all kinds of fun things about Redis. I don't know how many of you use Redis, but Redis is great as long as you're okay with maybe 2 nodes, one up, one down, which isn't really all that different than my active passive SQL cluster. And it's good, but you start thinking about using Couchbase in there as that layer, as you're sort of replacing it and using it as a key value store to replace Redis. On top of having the document store as well, you start getting a lot of bang for the buck. And click of a button deployments, all those fun things. And even talking to the joint guys last night and seeing their session, it looks like it's going to be even easier to do those things. Bigger problem to solve there, bigger people to convince to go back to the infrastructure guys and go, no, listen, this is crazy, but remember that thing we thought about 20 years ago? It actually works. So some additional things that I think are really important to talk about. I mentioned that it requires less hardware, delivers more performance. Mongo's infrastructure, as of our prototyping, not to badmouth Mongo, the way we did it, it would, and I apologize, I don't have the actual number of reduction, but it was about maybe half. I need half Couchbase for the Mongo that I've got. Now, a lot of that is some of the Mongo implementation we didn't size it right up front, and it's sort of a paradigm shift for most developers and engineers to think, well, what do you mean I have to put all of my data in memory? I don't understand. I can't put all my data in memory. I have like 200 gigs of data. How can I put that in memory? We only have machines that we're allowed to with 16 gigs or 96 gigs or whatnot. How am I going to do that? Do I have to cluster this? And so learning that the hard way with Mongo, and again, we let a development team as a reward for pulling off a good project go off on their own, sort of a FedEx day that was sort of a FedEx quarter. And they figured that out on their own, and I sat back patiently and said, I'm here to help you when you want my help. Otherwise, let's see what you got. And so, it helped me in that proof too to come back to them and say, you could have done this way with Couchbase, and you could have saved yourself probably about a month and a half of work. And we got to, get more bang for the buck. So a lot of that is still in the works. We're still processing that. So the idea is that we will replace Mongo. We will replace Redis. We won't replace SQL Server, unfortunately, because SQL Server has a nice little niche to it for certain things that it ain't broke, why fix it kind of concept. So I think for us, the other big differentiators are really the flexibility that Couchbase as a company comes to. I mean, we are using Fusion, LucidWorks Fusion's Solar implementation. Obviously, that is out of the box connectable to Elastic, or Elasticsearch, which is now, I guess, Elastic. And for us, we weren't looking at Elastic for other reasons, and this was about 4 years ago because Elastic at the time didn't have some of the features that we needed around multilingual. Obviously, they do now. But that relationship built over those years, and then we've progressively gone towards that route. So it was naturally fitting. I said, hey, Couchbase, what about a connector to Solar? Hey, Solar, what about a connector to Couchbase? And I sort of married the two, and voila, we got it. And as that connector speaks, I don't know how many other people out there of the Couchbase world are using this, but for me, what that gives me is it's a real-time connection. It uses XDCR replication factors, so it's literally, I change the document in Couchbase, it's instantaneous indexing. So what do I not have to do? I don't have to schedule it. I don't have to worry about, well, how do I know what a delta was, or how do I figure that out, that delta query logic, and the testing we've done there has been going on for about 6 months. And I'll get into a little bit about what that is. But quite frankly, it's unheard of performance improvements for us around our data ingestion flows. Now with 4 JDBC drivers popping up, we got tight integration into our ETL tools, which everybody obviously has. And I've been playing around with Nickel personally, haven't exposed this really to the team. I've got some hesitations around, well, if you make it SQL and you have a language, you're going to slow it down. I'm happy to say that it does not seem to be doing that whatsoever. So I've put my foot in my mouth a few times on that one now. And it's getting better. So it's really starting to wrap my head around that, though, and saying, well, that's kind of crazy. Now I've got a lot of code that's written in SQL. I've got a lot of engineers that know nothing but SQL. And quite frankly, the marriage of the language is pretty spot on. So most of our code that we may have written in SQL queries can be easily converted over. I think I personally tackled about 20 of them, and it was maybe 1 or 2 changes in the syntax that I had to do. Night and day difference in performance. Loaded the same data set in document store in Couchbase. It was a 3-node cluster. It was only, I think, 8 gigs of RAM each. It was roughly maybe 80 megs of data, so not a big data set, but it was still a very fast performing difference between on a scale of 10x. So pretty impressive. So let's go into what is our problem really, and this has been fun for me because I've had sort of a shift in responsibility over the last 6 months, where I wasn't just originally I was the thinker and the doer, and I've moved more into the thinker role and the figure out role, and what that's allowed me to do is take a step back. I don't have to cat herd and manage the kids and do all that anymore. I just get to spend the time on the system, and the system is now my new nemesis. So you start getting under the hoods of things, and you start peeling back the onion, and as long as you got a good sense of pride in yourself and you're okay with self-criticism, because most of the problems in here I had something to do with creating, and I'm okay with that. I like to grow and improve, and as long as I'm doing that, I think I'm doing all right. So from that standpoint, today, I'll give you a good example, and I'm sorry I don't have slides on this. My information security folks and legal folks don't want me to put anything that can be taken out, but I'm happy to verbally talk about this as best I can. So today, Moody's.com is primarily driven and backed by Endeca. I don't know how many people know who Endeca is. Endeca used to be a separate company by itself. Oracle bought them, I believe, a few years back and integrated them and did some decent things for them if you're in e-commerce, which we are not. And even the original Endeca implementation was really driven towards e-commerce. I mean, the out-of-the-box sample app is a wine store. It's fun to go through our code and see where we've left things like that in there. Like, oh, look, there's a Cabernet model. Wonder what kind of rating we could do there. But so give you an idea that we decided to treat it more than just a search engine. We made it a database. And if you think about it, and I have to remind folks that I work with now who've been with me for that whole lifetime, it's about nine-year roadmap with them on there, that Endeca really is actually a type of NoSQL as well. It's more than just a search. And you sort of compare the two against Solr and Endeca. When you start using it as a database, it gets a little quagmire-ish, right? We have time series data that we've crapped in there. And the problem I've got is you got a single index engine. You can then have to shard out and get your read-only indexes. You cluster them with a load balancer, but there's still a full copy on every box. I think we're up to about 30 index engines behind the scenes, all bare metal hardware. You start doing the math, any of you that pay and deal with infrastructure, bare metal support these days is a hell of a lot of money. Trying to fix bare metal is a bigger problem. Slowly converting that into virtualized, but it's a big nightmare because it's at the end of the day, you step back and you say, well, we could spend a bunch of money and keep doing what we're doing, or we could spend that money and then resources and time going towards improving this. So really the big thing that we're pushing in now is we'll replace the search capabilities with LucidWorks Fusion's Solr implementation. We get massive change there. The honest driving force that I've got now is the strategy around the management and saying, if it's not searchable or it doesn't return the result set, you do not put it in there, right? Period. We'll see how long that goes. I'm guessing maybe a year, or if I leave the company, it'll definitely go to crap and they'll put everything in there. And we'll do the same things, and maybe 9 years later, we'll have a solar nightmare called Endeca. But separating the data access out of that and sort of abstracting that out, specifically for our high-end front-end store. So Moody's.com, it's not Amazon or ESPN or CNN, but on average, when we do a significant rating, we get lots of user spike traffic to our site. Tell you when at least a year or so ago, I think it was, when we were coming out and saying some rather unpleasant things and basically having fun with the global economy, the traffic spiked massively, and almost so that we literally triggered and thought we were under a DDoS, which obviously threw up all kinds of bells and whistles and alarms. Our SQL server was crawling to a halt. I think the fastest page load I saw was about 3 minutes, and that was after the fact that I just killed it and said, now this is dead, and it's just not telling me it's dead, which is really bad. I mean, we get the money by distributing the press release and taking the action, but it's pretty embarrassing when you got a serious investor out there who sees this, clicks off of it from Bloomberg, and can't get to the gist of the rating, can't see the data, and then that same person pays us $1 million plus a year to be able to get to it. It's really bad. So, sort of evolving that and getting us into that space and putting a modern data architecture for our back end of the application, as well as in parallel deal with, okay, how do we put in a proper data management so that I know the data that I've put up in this fast system now is verifiable and accurate and good, while also maintaining the flexibility of being schemaless and sort of, if we want to find other data values from our data scientists, we might say, hey, we've been ignoring this, coupon field over here, this maturity field, let's add it in there. We can do that now. So that's really what we're doing, and I call it legacy infrastructure. Again, we're using bare metal. We have Windows 2003 even. That's even funner to convince developers that, you can put this, no more Windows, period. Put this on Linux. I'm an original Linux guy. I hate it. I'm probably one of 3 people at Moody's that refuses to use a Windows work machine. The downside is I don't have a lot of access from the MacBook, but I don't really care. So that's really it for our use case. We're expanding the horizon too, and I'll go into that. I've separated that out a little bit to tell you what the future is. So some of our challenges, really. I mean, a lot of you have probably faced this. If you look at the modeling concepts, right? You're modeling data. There's not a whole lot of tools out there to help you model JSON. Right? I'm going to take a traditional RDML structure, I'm going to move it into a JSON format and a document structure. There are some tools. Honestly, my favorite is only available on the iPad, which is fun to do on the iPad, but then it's, what am I going to do with it now? I can't sit my iPad in front of a developer and say, no, here it is, or take photos of it, I guess, and inject it in the user story. But so the other bits are, it really is hard to take somebody that's been modeling in an RDMS state for, I don't know, personally, I've been doing it forever. And I still have the sugar of saying, well, no, I got to make this, one-to-many relationship or this many-to-many relationship, and I end up nesting it. And I think you can do a really bad job if you don't do it the right way when you're doing this. So it's really evolving, and it's a learning curve and trying to get people there. I think I came around after about two to 3 weeks of trying this and was like, lots of dumb moments, and that now it makes sense. So you start looking at the way we structure it. And again, in Endeca, we sort of broke it apart, and you could look at each of those as XML docs, and they're structured that way. But even there, because there's no easy join capability, it's all glorified XPath when you're extracting data. We have a lot of duplication. So a debt record is going to have a lot of information about its org inside of it, which is ridiculous because if you look at our front-end screen, we don't actually store that in an individual. So you're storing a one record inside your many, which is just crazy. I personally was not involved with that decision, though, for the record. So the other big parts are around shifting the hardware bit. Like I've talked about, some of our team had issues with how do I do this and how do you size this? I mean, I think I've buttered our sales rep several times about, I don't understand this, man. I read your equation online. I still don't get it. He said, well, we'll help you. And then that puts the onus back on me to go try and figure out, well, how many documents do I have? How much hardware do I have? We're getting there. It's a little bit of a challenge to think because when you start looking at that, and like I said, we've modeled our data incorrectly. Now rather than give you generic numbers of what we've already got, that might be different now that we're going to clean that up and say, okay, maybe we won't have that. Maybe we'll have less. Maybe we might have more. We don't want to get there yet. So there's some issues there. Obviously, we have tons of ETL. I think to date, on record, I have roughly 22 different data sets and sources in varying varieties, from anywhere to third-party sources. And as Moody's Analytics, we're a separate entity from the Moody's ratings business, so we technically are a customer of Moody's Investor Services, which is weird, but we consume their data. Used to be through traditional Sybase RTE replication messages, which is try deciphering long transactions, and chances are good nothing really changed, but we just did a bunch of work anyway. It is now in a more efficient single pipe flow. We're using protocol buffer messages and sort of giving me all the data at once in one big object helps us a lot better. And when you take that, you throw that into Couchbase, by the way, raw, in its modeled structure, it changes our average throughput of changing a rating for an entity from 5 to 10 minutes to less than a second. Now, when you put that behind with LucidWorks Fusion and Solar on top of that, indexing that, it's near real time for a user to be searching and finding that information as well, which was unheard of before. And I'll give you an example. We mess with Fannie Mae pretty much all the time. That everything out there is related to the Fannie Mae, right? So it's not just that object that we get. It triggers a change upstream for everything. So you're looking at roughly 1,000 different entities with varying degrees of instruments behind them and massive changes in history on the scale of near terabyte change, roughly 1 to 2 times a week. The existing flows just choke and can't handle it. The new flow gets better. The prototyping flow, we don't care. No more do we need an alert from you. No more do we need to have meetings to talk about, well, what are we going to do about this? We don't have to come up with a banner and get it approved from legal and throw that up there. So it's serious, right? The connectors was one of those challenges, but that's been addressed for the most part. I don't think there's anything that we can't have now or can't do. And the SDK breadth speaks for itself. You guys even have a Go SDK. And personally, on my own, I've been loving Go. Go is great. Good for a specific thing, but if you're a technology guy and you've been doing this forever, you're in love right now because every 5 minutes you get a new language that pops up and you're like, great, this is awesome. So. Only biggest one that everybody faces is skilled resources. I think I, for one, am stop using that as an excuse because just because they don't exist doesn't mean you can get them trained and you can't make them that way. So what's next really for us? We have a tablet app that is built for iOS as well as Android. We did this in sort of hodgepodge way. We're really relying on services, and we are seeing we are suffering performance issues with it. The good news is our adoption rate to use that, our user sort of base is really not that hip yet. So it's slowly progressing into the tablet space and the smartphone, and we've got time to make that change. And this has literally only been live for, I think, maybe 2 months now. So Couchbase Mobile is really a big play for that. It's a little bit more complicated for us to put that in because A, we've not prototyped it, B, we outsourced our tablet app, period, and are still in that process of, okay, we took that debt on, now we're paying the price for it to train our own resources to help change this and evolve it. On top of that, we're trying to build up our analytic platform. I think right now we do analytics if there was something older than the Stone Age, I would give it that. And we sort of do a lot of, well, let's take this little piece of data and we'll only report on this, and anybody that wants this can go collect it and stick it in another tab or put it in their own spreadsheets and make magic themselves, and that generally results in a lot of people that I work with really pissed off at me because I'm not agreeing to give them something more holistically. but that's not revenue generating, so I don't really care. Another big factor we use, web trends and Google Analytics and a handful of other things to track our usage. And those are great, but I think for us, that was one of the biggest things I started looking at NoSQL was, well, I could just capture that information myself and very fast write it somewhere, retrieve it however I want, rather than the fact that every click is calling out a third-party JavaScript library somewhere else. And we have all kinds of clients behind all kinds of firewalls and all kinds of really archaic network structures that the data we collect from that is, you got to read it with a grain of salt. So, and it's a big nightmare as well. So that's one of those other things. Obviously, improving our data delivery platforms. This is a very significant part of our business. We can't change it too much because of the nature of our clientele. I mean, if JP Morgan Chase, who pays me a very large sum of money to consume my flat files, I can't walk in there and say, I want you to consume it from a RESTful API, and I want you to give me $20 million more for it, right? That's a fun conversation. We've tried. We still try. We sneak it in a little bit more cleverly. Usually that conversation, like I'm sure some of the Couchbase guys, they start with the tech guys first. They don't go to the business. They convince the tech guys, and they're like, oh yeah, this would make our lives easy. So slowly but surely, we are building out our Excel add-in. Obviously, a lot of asset managers and financial types live in Excel, so having a very robust, powerful Excel add-in helps that. To get there, we've got a lot of work around, okay, so my data management problem. And so this is my latest, greatest. Over the last several months, I've uncovered the fact that our data and our content is basically our bread and butter. It is our money. Without it, we would have nothing but lipstick and a pig, I guess. But we treat it like it's a criminal. So time to stop doing that, time to start making things better, time to improving our states of what do we do, how do we collect this all, how come over here this thing's called a bond, over here it's a maturity, over here it's a deal. But I don't know that because there's no common set of identifiers, there's no common set of anything. So the idea is to get there. Right now, we're looking at Couchbase again as that back-end application store to improve the performance there. We are looking at it in other ways and other shapes because of its scale and performance and stability. Obviously, if we could one day have a proper, full-blown data architecture running in there, might be a good thing. Not sure if that's ever going to happen. No offense to anybody in here, but I think the more diverse we have in our data structure and the more management capability we have around that strategy, the better. That's it. That's all I've got for you. Thank you for your time. You can reach out to me. I'm here the rest of the day. If you see me walking around, I have one of these fun, I must be important sort of tags. Several people have identified me that way. But anyway, thanks again. Hopefully you found it interesting. And if anybody's got it, if you have any questions, you can either come up or hit me now. I think there's...
Yeah, actually, we have a microphone right here, so if you have a question, go ahead and just raise your hand.
You talked about your modeling challenges coming from a relational world. Now that now that Couchbase is coming with Nickel, will you go and it gives you like giant capabilities? Will you go back to the relational modeling?
No. It's a great question. I've answered my own employees now, at least 2 of them, including my boss. And it was said to me in that way that, well, now we don't have this challenge because we can just keep doing things the way we're doing them. And to me, it's like, well, that may be good and well, but if you want to take advantage, then we are only taking advantage of scale and performance, right? We're not taking advantage of the management strategy of our data and modeling this the right way, right? So you allow that to persist. You allow people to do bad modeling. You allow things to get out of control, and then inevitably, I don't care how fast Couchbase is, if I've got Wild West inside of it, it's not going to be that great. So there is obviously a challenge there for me. It's more evangelizing that I have to do and a little less fascism where I say no. But it is one of those things I even struggle with. I was like, well, wait a minute. I just spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to remodel this. Why did I do that? Because now it's easy. But
All right. Any others? Time for just, looks like one last one.
When trying to transition from SQL, actually before you even transition from SQL to NoSQL, what were the challenges that you faced trying to work with the SQL bigots who said, oh, it has to be a SQL database? What kind of arguments you use? What kind of persuasion you had to work at to make sure that you convince people, hey, this is a better path. Let's go down this way.
Yeah, so for the record, I'm still doing it. I'm probably going to be doing it for at least another couple of years, I think. And you're never going to prove everything to everybody, you know. I like, my approach is really to go after the folks that I think are acceptable to that change and willing to look at it. There are guys that we've got that, you know, won't even talk to me and, you know, give me the hand. But for the most part, I've been lucky enough to move up the rank, so I can actually pull rank on a few of them and say, well, we're going to do this because I said so, kind of thing. But I like to go at that with proof. And so I prototype myself, I POC myself. When I go into a meeting and show this, I literally spin up a demo I've done and say, here you go. You know, the best thing that Couchbase has done for me is provide a beer sample database. And everybody on my team, not sure that this was, there's no HR in the room, but it happened coincidentally that everybody that works with me likes to drink beer. So when you show a demo with that, you know, and you prove up, and I say, what's the beer? What beer did you drink last night? You know, they do that, and I'm like, there you go. That's how come it's faster. And I took the same sample and I put it in a relational data store, write the same query, didn't go as fast, right? And you start looking at that and you start making them read up on it and figuring it out, they start turning around. You also get a fun little way of managerial. Talk to them to say, remember you were complaining about your job and how boring it was? Well, here's a new thing. You should be transitioning because it is here and it's here to stay and you need to move on, you know? So that helps too. Honestly, the biggest challenge I've got is around the infrastructure guys because they still haven't even adapted to the cloud yet, quite frankly. And that's partly because we're Moody's and we're a big old enterprise and you got guys that are just that used to doing things a certain way. And I mean, it took 3 years to sign an Amazon contract and to be allowed to do anything there. And even that project's struggling because they're trying to say, well, I have this bare metal machine. How come I don't have the same equivalent over here? It's just a different way of thinking. So like anything in technology, right, if you aren't willing to change and evolve into the different, more efficient way of thinking, then, you know, that's it. But that's the best I could give you there. Just keep persevering in pressure. Big stick, I guess, helps too.
Awesome. Okay, Gabe, Arnett, everyone.
Thank you
you so much. Okay, once again, just a quick reminder, we have lunch. It's going to be served